Let's get into the story. Annabelle Thompson had never left the familiar red sands and narrow dusty paths of Ocean State until that morning. The air had felt unusually heavy as she stood outside her mother's mud brick house in Motakik, a neatly packed gonna-must-go bag by her feet and a smaller box containing the only inheritance her grandmother had left her, a vintage black sewing machine with a gold emblem, still polished from years of careful use. Her mother stood in silence, arms folded tightly, her expression unreadable but her eyes swollen from the prayers she'd whispered all night. "Lagos is not friendly," she had said repeatedly, the words echoing through the compound and into Annabelle's heart like a warning chant. But for Annabelle, staying back meant stitching dreams only on pillows. She had talent. Even the harshest traders in the local market marveled at the gowns and blouses she crafted from second-hand fabric. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want wealth. She just wanted to walk into a room and see someone wear a dress that bore her label. And that dream, she believed, lived somewhere between the towering buildings and restless traffic of Lagos. The journey was long and suffocating, spent sandwiched between strangers in the back of a cracked Toyota Hiace. Her seatbelt didn't work, and the only music that played was an old CD mix of Fuji hits. Her mind didn't care. She spent the entire trip staring out of the window, watching the landscape change from sparse bushes to bustling towns and finally to the concrete chaos of the city. Her eyes widened when they passed Burger, giant billboards, honking cars, a never-ending stream of Danfo buses swerving without mercy. The bus finally stopped at Ojota, where hawkers nearly dragged passengers out with bottles of water and gala, shouting prices that tripled before noon. Annabelle stepped down with her heart thudding like a sewing machine on full speed. She adjusted her scarf, tightened her grip on her bag, and stared ahead, not knowing where exactly she was going but certain she could not afford to fail. This was not just relocation. This was reinvention. A new life, fueled by threads, needles, and hope. Finding shelter was the first mountain to climb. With barely $15,000 left from the small cash gift given to her by her church women's group, Annabelle trekked along side streets, asking passers-by where she might find a cheap room. Eventually, she was directed to a rundown compound in Ajij, where a stern-looking landlord agreed to rent her a tiny room with broken louvers and one shaky ceiling fan. The walls were stained with age, and the floor creaked in some parts, but it was a space she could call her own. That night, she sat on the edge of her mattress, legs folded beneath her, notebook open with dress sketches fluttering beside a flickering rechargeable lamp. Her hand hovered over the page as she drew her newest design, Eco Grace, a name inspired by her arrival. Her stomach grumbled, but her spirit was full. Lagos had swallowed many, yes. But she was not here to be digested. She was here to design her way out of the shadows. James Patrick had grown used to the loud thuds of the neighborhood generator humming outside his one-room apartment in the heart of Surulere. The room was sparsely furnished, a foam mattress lay on the tiled floor, stacked notebooks on a shaky wooden table, and an old laptop with a missing F key sat beside empty takeaway packs. His walls were decorated with pinned-up newspaper cutouts of his own bylines, stories he'd fought to get published as a freelance journalist. Most Lagosians didn't know his name, but those who read political blogs and indie columns admired his guts. His latest exposé on a corrupt real estate tycoon had been ignored by the mainstream press but reposted by a Twitter influencer, earning him a brief wave of online applause. Still, applause didn't pay NEPA bills or feed his stomach. James survived on freelance gigs, covering street events, editing videos, and filming vox pop interviews for smaller online media platforms. It was on one such assignment that fate led him to Annabelle. That Tuesday, James had been assigned a filler segment on youth voices in local entrepreneurship for a low-budget show on Channel Lagos Digital. He had wandered around Yaba with his small DSLR camera, microphone wrapped in masking tape, and a cameraman named Uche who doubled as his roommate. Most of the people they interviewed gave bland, uninspiring answers, some mumbled about hustle, others simply posed for the camera to promote their Instagram handles. But just as James was about to wrap up, he spotted her. A dark-skinned young woman in a simple yellow top and skirt, standing beside a kiosk where brightly colored fabrics hung like trophies. She was bent over a piece of cloth, stitching with focused intensity, her brows furrowed in quiet purpose. James paused. There was something magnetic about the way she worked, unbothered by the Lagos noise, unaffected by the chaos. When he approached and asked for an interview, she looked up slowly, blinking as if returning from a distant world. Her name was Annabelle Thompson, and the moment she spoke about how fashion could restore dignity to young women like her, James felt something shift. Her words were eloquent, thoughtful, and warm. Her eyes never begged for sympathy, only respect. After the brief recording, James lingered longer than he usually did with interviewees. He asked about her sketches pinned to the wooden board, complimented her on the boldness of her colors, and even offered to send the clip to his cousin who worked in a creative hub. Annabelle smiled politely but said nothing of it. Lagos was full of promises that disappeared with daylight. Still, James couldn't stop thinking about her as he walked away. That night, while editing the footage, he paused several times on her face. There was grace there. Not beauty in the Instagram sense, but something real, something that made a man straighten up and question if he'd been chasing noise instead of meaning. For the first time in a while, James didn't feel like a journalist looking for the next scoop. He felt like a man who had stumbled upon something rare, an unscripted, unfiltered story that needed no exaggeration. And it began, surprisingly, not in government halls or protest grounds, but at a sewing table in a Yaba corner shop. James couldn't get Annabelle's interview out of his head. After uploading the edited Vox Pop to the Channel Lagos digital site, he personally clipped Annabelle's segment and shared it with his cousin Ifani, a design director at a fashion co-working studio in Surulere called Threadhouse Collective. James knew that Ifani occasionally offered shared workspaces to rising fashion designers and tailors, and while he couldn't guarantee a job, he hoped to at least open a door. 2 days later, he returned to Yaba under the pretense of getting more B-roll footage, but Annabelle saw through it. She was stitching a wrapper for an elderly customer and raised an eyebrow when she saw him walking toward her with a nylon bag of gala and bottled water. "Back for another interview?" she asked, lips twitching in amusement. James grinned sheepishly, handed her the snack, and explained his plan. Though hesitant, Annabelle followed him to Threadhouse later that week, her machine carefully tucked in a bag, hands sweaty with both fear and hope. Threadhouse Collective was everything Annabelle had never imagined she would experience so soon. Glass-paneled workrooms, clients walking in and out with fabric swatches, and mannequins dressed in experimental designs lined the walls. Ifani, a tall, bohemian man with dyed dreadlocks, interviewed her informally while browsing through her sketch folder. He didn't sugarcoat things, told her bluntly that Lagos fashion was fast-paced and not for the timid, but after 15 minutes, he offered her a test: complete a custom blouse for a client within 2 hours. Annabelle rose to the challenge. Her stitches were exact, her design elegant but practical, and her creativity impressed the team. By the end of the day, she was assigned a shared workspace and access to a small portion of Threadhouse's leftover fabric bin. That night, she sat with James at a roadside suya stand in Ojulegba, the air heavy with roasting spices and danfo honks, both of them smiling like children who had survived a long day of rain only to find a rainbow. It was the first time Annabelle opened up about her family, her late father, her mother who still sold pap, her childhood dreams of sewing for celebrities. James, in turn, spoke of his struggles with media corruption, bounced checks, and how many editors told him to write gossip instead of truth. Over the following weeks, their connection grew quietly but firmly. James visited her often at the studio, sometimes just to bring food, sometimes pretending to conduct follow-up documentation. Annabelle found herself looking forward to his visits, even when she pretended not to notice his smile or the way he stood just a little too close while watching her work. For James, Annabelle became a breath of honesty in a world full of clout and deception. She didn't care about his growing online presence or the number of retweets he got. She cared about truth, growth, and passion. They would take evening walks down Masha Road, discussing life, dreams, and sometimes just laughing at how they both used to think making it in Lagos was about money alone. One evening, under a flickering streetlight, James held her hand for the first time. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. It was clear that whatever had started at a street-side kiosk had grown into something real, something stitched together not by chance, but by choice. The heat that hung over Lagos that January morning was the kind that made you question every dream you ever had. But for Annabelle Thompson, it marked the start of her own business, small, makeshift, but hers. After 2 months working inside Threadhouse Collective, she had saved just enough to rent a narrow wooden shed beside a busy row of shops in Ojulegba. It wasn't much, just a rusted zinc roof nailed to warped timber frames, with a faded banner that read Anna's Needle. Her mother had sent her a 5,000 top-up from Osen to encourage her, and with it, she bought her first bolt of imported cotton fabric. Her tailoring machine, now polished, oiled, and slightly upgraded, sat proudly near the open window. Pedestrians walked past uninterested, but she kept sewing. At first, she took on minor repair jobs, patching trousers, altering skirts, sewing broken zippers. Her prices were humble, her delivery fast, and word began to spread. Soon, hawkers, teachers, and even a few church ushers began to bring her custom orders. Annabelle began stitching her name into every finished blouse, not for branding, but for faith. Anna T became her quiet signature. Meanwhile, James sat hunched in his cramped room, typing furiously into his laptop with the kind of hunger only someone fighting for relevance could understand. For weeks, he had been investigating an embezzlement scandal involving a local government chairman and forged medical invoices from a ghost hospital. The story had taken months to compile, sleepless nights, secret recordings, doctored documents, and reluctant whistleblowers. Editors had rejected it repeatedly, claiming it was too risky or unverified. But James believed in it with the kind of ferocity that had kept him in journalism when his mates switched to PR. That week, after tweaking the final draft and including verified documents and eyewitness testimonies, he self-published it on an independent online platform called Nigedepth. Within hours, the story began to trend on Twitter. Several public figures shared the article. A popular radio station even discussed it live during their evening news hour. James's inbox overflowed with messages from anonymous sources, journalists, and political analysts. For the first time in his freelance career, his name was being spoken beyond Surrelir. That night, after closing her roadside stand and carefully locking her materials in a padlocked box, Annabelle walked to James's apartment with cold jollof rice and fried turkey wrapped in foil. She found him on the floor, laptop glowing, eyes wide with disbelief. He looked up at her like a man who had just found gold in mud. I think I did something big," he whispered, voice shaky. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. She sat beside him, handed him the food, and let him talk, about the threats he had already received, about the calls from senior editors asking to interview him, and about how surreal it all felt. And then, for the first time since they met, Annabelle leaned in and hugged him, not as a friend or customer, but as someone who saw him, completely. Two young dreamers. One with thread. One with words. Both rising quietly from the dust of Lagos, building legacies one honest step at a time. The rain had poured heavily the night before, blessing the red sand road that led to the small Christ Dominion Church in Mushin with a freshness that only Lagos dawn could provide. It was a Saturday morning, and inside the modest church with its cracked tiled floor and peeling white walls, stood Annabelle and James, dressed not in designer clothes, but in sincerity. Annabelle wore a second-hand lace gown she had altered herself, cinched at the waist with golden thread and sewn with tiny pearl beads that shimmered faintly in the morning light. Her natural hair was packed into a soft bun, adorned with tiny silver pins. James stood beside her in a simple brown kaftan, freshly ironed, with black slippers to match. There were no violinists, no wildflowers, and no decorative backdrops. But what the church lacked in grandeur, it made up for in intimacy and love. Only 5 guests sat in the pews: Annabelle's mother, James's younger sister Amaka, his closest friend Uche the cameraman, Madame Remy from the Yaba kiosk, and Ifani, the fashion studio mentor who had become family. The pastor, a wiry elderly man with gentle eyes, officiated the ceremony with warmth. As they exchanged vows, James held Annabelle's hands firmly, almost afraid she'd vanish if he let go. His voice trembled slightly as he promised to protect her, respect her dreams, and remain her partner even when the world shifts beneath us. Annabelle, soft-spoken as ever, looked him in the eyes and said, "I'm not here to complete you, I'm here to walk beside you." Uche recorded everything with shaky hands, whispering "God, a beg no let battery die" under his breath. Outside, the church's rusted signage swung gently in the breeze, while 2 little girls from the neighborhood peeked through the open window, giggling at the bride's dress. There were no flamboyant guests or Instagram hashtags, just 5 witnesses, a shared promise, and the quiet knowledge that this love had been earned through fire, not fantasy. After the ceremony, they all walked to a nearby buka where a local caterer had set up 3 plastic tables covered in red nylon. The menu was jollof rice, wamwa, fried plantain, and a single cooler of soft drinks. Annabelle's mother danced to the music of a small Bluetooth speaker playing Topolabi, while Madame Remy toasted with a plastic cup of Maltina, raising it high and declaring, "Na these kind love day last pass." James and Annabelle laughed, danced, and even fed each other with shaky fingers, taking blurry selfies with their small phones. They didn't care about the number of likes. They cared about the moment. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the couple returned to their new shared apartment, a self-contained room and attire that still smelled of fresh paint. There was no bed frame yet, just a mattress on the floor, a borrowed gas cylinder, and a plastic wardrobe. But as they sat beside each other in silence, fingers entwined, they both knew love had given them a new name, and even without chandeliers or limousines, they had started something golden. The newsroom was a buzzing mess that Monday morning when James uploaded the final version of his long-simmering investigation, an explosive exposé implicating 2 Lagos commissioners and a real estate developer in a $700 million land allocation fraud. He titled it boldly, "Plots and Power: How Public Land Became Private Profit." For months, he had gathered evidence, leaked government memos, drone footage of undeclared properties, and voice recordings of secret meetings. It was his most dangerous story yet. He knew that publishing it on Nigedept again wouldn't offer him much protection, but he also knew he had no choice. Truth, to James, was a fire that either burned in your chest or consumed you from the inside out. He clicked publish at 6:47 a.m., barely blinking as the screen refreshed. And then, the storm began. By 10 a.m., Twitter was flooded with hashtags, #LandLootLagos and #JamesPatrickInvestigates. Several influential activists reposted it. A famous Nollywood actress quoted it, calling him the real MVP of journalism. By noon, 2 news anchors discussed the article live, while analysts debated the depth of the corruption exposed. Even major dailies that once ignored him reached out for interviews. Journalists who had never replied to his emails now invited him to panel discussions. Offers from podcast shows, radio stations, and documentary producers poured in. His phone rang constantly, calls from strange numbers, some to praise, some to threaten. One anonymous message simply read, "You don't know what you've started." While James had imagined this day 1,000 times, recognition, applause, invitations, nothing prepared him for how it felt to watch his name trend nationally. In the middle of it all, he sat quietly in his room, his laptop open, his inbox blinking. The same room that once mocked him with unpaid rent now vibrated with validation. Yet, amid the digital applause, there was a hum of unease. Fame had arrived like a whirlwind, loud, demanding, unpredictable. Uche walked in with roasted corn and groundnuts and declared, "Guy, you don blow oh. But make sure say dem no blow you go kirikiri." They both laughed, but James knew the risks. Journalists had been disappeared for less. But still, as the sun fell and his name continued to blaze across headlines, James leaned back on his wall, took a deep breath, and whispered to no one, "This is only the beginning." James Patrick was no longer just a journalist, he had become a sensation. In the span of 2 months, he went from sharing articles on niche platforms to being the face of bold, fearless reporting in Nigeria. Panel invitations came weekly. He hosted radio shows. He was featured in The Guardian, profiled in City Talk magazine, and even interviewed by a popular South African news outlet. Public relations firms sought him out. Politicians dreaded his name. With this new stature came a new lifestyle, stylish kaftans, interviews at Radisson Blu, late nights with media executives, and constant movement between events in Victoria Island, Lekki, and Abuja. While the world celebrated the new voice of Nigerian truth, James's world behind closed doors began to fade quietly, especially the part that included Annabelle. Annabelle watched it happen gradually, the way one watches the flame of a candle shrink without wind. At first, she was proud. She cut out every article that mentioned his name, shared his links with her clients, and even sewed him custom outfits for his appearances. But as the weeks rolled on, she began to feel like a quiet ghost haunting the corners of his now luxurious routine. He would return home late, always on phone calls, always planning the next feature or meetup. Their evening walk stopped. Their quiet dinners turned into hurried meals. The thoughtful conversations that once stitched their hearts together were replaced by voicemails and short "I'm tired" texts. Sometimes, he would forget to mention interviews he had done until she saw them online. Once, he even missed a dinner they had planned for her birthday. He was on a TV panel in Abuja. She had waited 2 hours with jollof and fried goat meat on the table, a small candle melting into nothingness. Annabelle tried to understand. She told herself it was just a season, that James was chasing something important for both of them. But deep down, a quiet ache had started to form in her chest. She still manned her roadside fashion kiosk daily, growing her client base slowly, methodically, but it felt lonely now. She would catch glimpses of him on Instagram, standing beside celebrities, or being quoted in headlines, looking like a man reborn in gold. At home, the mattress remained on the floor, their small mirror cracked at the corner, and their electric bulb flickering overhead. He promised to fix them, but there was always something else, somewhere else. One night, as James stood before the bathroom mirror rehearsing a TEDx speech, Annabelle watched him from their bed, his silhouette sharp against the dim light, and wondered silently, when did I stop being enough? The Marriott Conference Hall in Victoria Island shimmered with luxury and the calculated energy of Lagos elites. It was the annual PRX Africa Influence Awards, a glamorous gathering of Nigeria's top media moguls, public relations executives, and thought leaders. James Patrick had been invited as a keynote speaker to discuss the role of journalism in shaping public perception. He arrived in a navy blue senator outfit that had been styled by a celebrity fashion house, his first outfit not stitched by Annabelle. Cameras clicked as he entered the hall, nodding at media executives and exchanging light banter with familiar faces. He had become fluent in Lagos fame: smile, speak boldly, disappear behind the glass of attention. That was where Lillian Vincent first noticed him, from across the ballroom, a flute of champagne in hand and a glint of curiosity in her sharp, almond-shaped eyes. Lillian Vincent was not the kind of woman Lagos forgot easily. A 32-year-old PR powerhouse with skin like onyx and confidence that arrived 3 seconds before she did, Lillian had built her brand from the ruins of a failed modeling career. She now ran Vincent Strategies, one of the most in-demand PR firms handling celebrity scandals, political campaigns, and high-profile product launches. Dressed in a white satin gown with gold tassels lining her shoulders, she walked across the room with the poise of someone used to owning every space she entered. When she finally reached James, she introduced herself casually, yet with purpose. "James Patrick," she said, holding out her manicured hand, the man of the moment. "I've been dying to meet you." Her smile was deliberate, sharp enough to intrigue, soft enough to disarm. James returned the greeting with a grin, slightly taken aback by her presence, but flattered. The two spoke at length, sipping champagne under the cascading light of a crystal chandelier. She praised his courage, dissected his viral story with razor-sharp insight, and even challenged some of his conclusions. Unlike many who only praised James, Lillian challenged him. She offered him ideas on how to refine his personal brand, turn his reports into podcasts, and start a visual docuseries. She spoke in confident, polished tones, alternating between Yoruba and English, making James feel like he was being schooled by both an expert and a siren. As the night wore on, James laughed more freely than he had in weeks. When Lillian lightly touched his arm while describing a media vision board strategy, a strange flutter moved through him, one he ignored. Before leaving, she slid her business card into his palm and leaned in close. "If you ever want to go from viral to iconic," she whispered, her voice like silk, "call me." That night, James sat in the back seat of his Uber with her card burning a hole in his pocket. Back at home, Annabelle had left him food on the table and fallen asleep sewing a batch of Sunday uniforms for a school contract she'd secured. He saw her curled beside the sewing machine, her scarf slipping off, one hand still holding chalk. He kissed her forehead gently and turned off the light, but something in him was distracted. It wasn't love that was missing, it was ego being fed elsewhere. Lillian had introduced herself not just to his hand, but to his ambition. And slowly, dangerously, that introduction had taken root. It began with a meeting, one of many, or so James told Annabelle. He said he was consulting with some big industry hands who wanted to help him expand his investigative platform. Annabelle nodded as she packed his meal into a plastic container, unaware that the strategy session wasn't happening in any boardroom, but in the rooftop lounge of Lillian Vincent's Ikoyi penthouse. The apartment overlooked the Five Cowries Creek, with a view as bold and breathtaking as its owner. Lillian poured James a glass of wine while wearing a silk robe that clung to her curves like a second skin. She spoke of vision, strategy, and content packaging, but her eyes held something else, something unspoken yet dangerously clear. That evening, as soft jazz played in the background and the city lights glowed like jewels beneath them, James crossed a line he thought he'd never approach. The betrayal wasn't sudden, it was seductive, calculated, and slow-burning. What started as strategy sessions evolved into private dinners, then overnight stays. Lillian introduced him to people who had money, influence, and media control. She helped him rebrand his social media presence, refine his wardrobe, and land a feature in an international media magazine. Slowly, James began orbiting a new world, one where Annabelle didn't exist. He stopped taking pictures at home, stopped sharing her meals on his page, and stopped including her name in his interviews. Lillian, sharp and cunning, never pushed him to leave Annabelle outright. She simply gave him everything he thought he was missing: prestige, polish, and the feeling of being untouchable. Their affair was careful. James booked hotels under fake names, deleted messages immediately, and lied through his teeth when Annabelle asked innocent questions like, "How was your meeting?" or "Who called just now?" At home, Annabelle began to feel it, not see it, not hear it, but feel it. A new kind of distance in his body language, his growing irritation when she asked simple things, the sudden perfume scents on his shirt that weren't hers. He no longer complimented her designs. He no longer offered to watch her fittings. And when she once asked to join him at a press gala, he laughed lightly and said, "It's mostly policy people. You won't enjoy it." But even in her quiet heartbreak, Annabelle said nothing. She stitched in silence, loved in silence, and prayed with a heart too tired to hope. Meanwhile, James, once the boy who held her hand through muddy Lagos nights, had become a man holding secrets under silk sheets, with a woman who knew exactly how to feed his ambition, even if it meant poisoning his soul. It was on a Thursday evening, just after rainfall had cleansed the Lagos air, that Annabelle found the truth, not from a confession, but from a forgotten detail James had failed to erase. He had been in a hurry that morning, packing for yet another media retreat in Abuja. In his rush, he left his iPad unlocked on the sofa. Annabelle hadn't planned to check it. She had been cleaning their small apartment, folding his kaftans, and organizing his travel snacks. But when a message popped up from Lillian Vincent, a short, suggestive sentence followed by a heart emoji and a photo of James in what appeared to be a robe, her hand froze. Then came another message: "Last night was everything. Book the same suite for Sunday?" No speculation, no need for assumptions. The truth had arrived, cold and sharp, without ceremony. She stood there for minutes, unable to breathe, the device still glowing in her hand. Her chest tightened, not with rage, but with that hollow ache that only betrayal can bring. She didn't scream. She didn't confront him. Annabelle simply sat down and stared at their small room, at the sewing machine she had pushed to the corner to give him space, at the newspaper clippings of his articles still taped proudly to the wall, and at the framed wedding photo tucked beside their Bible. Slowly, she folded his clothes into the bottom drawer, packed up her sketches, and unzipped her bag. She packed only what she had brought into the relationship: her machine, her clothes, her dignity. She didn't take the kitchenware or the mattress they had bought together. She didn't leave a note. There were no shouting matches, no broken dishes, no tears thrown in his face. Just silence. She left his favorite stew simmering in the pot. Closed the door behind her. Locked it gently. Dropped the key on the table outside their room. And walked away. James returned that evening to silence. At first, he thought she had stepped out to buy thread or see Madame Remy. But as hours passed, and the room remained dim, untouched, and hollow, it hit him. The wardrobe was half empty. The drawer of sketches, gone. The corner table where she used to sit and laugh while sewing, bare. He called her phone, but it was off. No messages. No clues. Just absence. He sat on the mattress in his now too quiet apartment, surrounded by evidence of a life he had slowly drained of love. There was no drama. No final speech. Just the deafening realization that she had left with nothing. And taken everything. The smell of earth after rain lingered over the red soil roads of Bodija, Ibadan, as Annabelle Thompson arrived at her aunt's modest bungalow tucked between a quiet mosque and an old cocoa trader's house. It had been 2 weeks since she left Lagos. She said nothing to anyone about why she returned, and her aunt, Mama Ronk, was too kind to ask questions. All she said was, "You are welcome, my daughter," and opened the door to a spare room where her late husband's radio still sat on a dusty shelf. The room became Annabelle's sanctuary. She set up her sewing machine near the window and resumed small tailoring gigs for local women, earning enough to buy soap, Gary, and thread. Ibadan was slower, more forgiving. No city lights to mask pain. No skyscrapers to remind her of what she had left behind. Here, she could breathe again. Or so she thought. It was during one of those quiet mornings, when the breeze from the mango trees brushed her face as she hemmed a school uniform, that she felt it, the sudden wave of nausea. She barely made it to the pit toilet before vomiting. The sickness continued for days, soft at first, then consistent. She thought it was stress, or maybe ulcer. But when her period missed for the second month, she sat down on the cement floor, her heart pounding. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she already knew. The next day, she visited a discreet pharmacy at Dudby Market. The test was positive. She was pregnant. With James's child. The news didn't come with joy. It came with stillness. Annabelle stared at the result in her hand under the harsh bulb of the pharmacist's kiosk, her heart blank. She said nothing to Mama Ronk. She told no friends. Not James. Not even Madame Remy when she called to check in. She simply returned home, closed her sewing box, and cried quietly into her wrapper that night. But by morning, she was different. She wiped her tears, drew up a budget, and took in more tailoring orders. She refused to let the child growing inside her inherit her heartbreak. She stitched clothes during the day and prayed over her stomach at night. She whispered promises to the baby in the dark, "You will not lack love. Even if it is just me, you will have enough." In silence, in secrecy, and in strength, Annabelle chose to carry her child, not for James, not for revenge, but for hope. She named him in her heart before he was born. Joseph. The one who came after betrayal, but brought me back to life. James Patrick's new Lecky Phase 1 apartment smelled of fresh paint, imported leather, and misplaced priorities. It was a spacious three-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a home office with polished oak furniture, and a marble kitchen Lillian personally designed through her elite interior decorator. The rent was paid a year in advance by one of James's new media investors, a connection Lillian facilitated after convincing him to incorporate his investigative platform into a limited liability company. Within days of moving in, Lillian also arrived with 3 suitcases, 2 garment racks, and a team of assistants. James didn't ask questions. He was too busy signing PR deals, brand partnership contracts, and lining up television appearances. Lillian wasn't just staying with him. She was managing him. Her influence crept in like expertly tailored fabric, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. She reorganized his wardrobe, hiring a stylist to phase out his local caftans and replace them with sleek, international designer wear. She rebranded his website, changed his logo, and rewrote his bio, downplaying the gritty past and focusing on media entrepreneurship. She declined certain interviews on his behalf, claiming they were beneath his new image. When he wanted to pursue another risky political story, she called it career suicide. Instead, she guided him toward more palatable content, social justice documentaries, influencer panels, and keynote speeches at sanitized summits. James, once a stubborn truth seeker, found himself nodding along. The attention was intoxicating. The clout was convenient. And Lillian made it all feel seamless. At first, James believed he was still in control. But soon, he noticed her name appearing in places it never used to, as his manager, his creative director, his partner. She filtered his emails, negotiated his paychecks, and selected which media house he should align with based on strategic optics. Their home became a revolving door for influencers, brand strategists, and campaign directors. The fridge was always stocked with imported wine and low-fat yogurts James never bought. His bedroom, once filled with quiet books and the scent of Annabelle's hair cream, now smelled of Lillian's jasmine perfume and candlelit ambition. And yet, James didn't resist. He told himself this was the cost of greatness. But somewhere deep in the silence of the apartment, tucked between the echoes of his conscience, a voice whispered, "You are no longer your own man." Meanwhile, Annabelle felt pains and was admitted to the hospital for delivery. She gave birth to a son and named him Joshua. The studio lights were blinding, the cameras unblinking, and the applause perfectly timed. The Spotlight with James Patrick premiered on national television with fireworks, trending hashtags, and a glitzy red carpet event attended by Lagos's finest. The show was sleek, conversational, and politically correct, nothing like the hard-hitting journalism James once swore by. Instead of exposing corruption, he now interviewed celebrities, tech entrepreneurs, and ministers with perfectly rehearsed talking points. Clipped in tailored suits and seated on velvet armchairs, James would smile, nod, and toss out buzzwords like narrative shaping, media evolution, and purposeful storytelling. Gone were the days of digging through trash for the truth. Now, his hands were manicured, his teeth polished, and his questions approved in advance. Each episode pulled massive viewership. Brands lined up for product placements, and influencers flooded his DMs with admiration. Fans addressed him with hashtags, hashtag the voice of now, hashtag Patrick Unfiltered, though ironically, nothing about him remained unfiltered. Lillian, always seated in the front row during tapings, controlled everything behind the scenes, bookings, sponsorships, post-show edits. She would tilt her head slightly when an answer dragged too long, or nod once to signal a scene cut. James adapted quickly, adjusting his tone and image like an actor rehearsing his lines. His home was now a showroom, his meals were catered, his old friends rarely called, and when they did, he didn't answer. People still praised him, of course. To the world, James Patrick was now more than a journalist, he was a brand. But fame, that shimmering blanket, slowly muffled his former identity. He stopped visiting Surreal. He forgot the anniversary of his wedding to Annabelle. He even told a foreign interviewer that he grew up in a humble Lecky household, erasing the very dust that raised him. In moments of quiet, when the cameras were off and the studio emptied, James sometimes caught his reflection in the dark glass of the teleprompter and felt a strange hollowness. But the claps would return, the deals would sign, and the spotlight would shine again, chasing away the questions. Reality had been replaced by celebrity. And the man who once hunted truth had now become its most polished disguise. Annabelle's days began before sunrise and ended long after the city's noise faded into night. In a modest corner of Ibadan's Arimo district, she turned the front veranda of her aunt's house into a mini tailoring studio. With old crates serving as fabric racks and a chalkboard menu propped against the wall listing her services, she branded it Little Royals by Anna T. The name, born from the way Joseph would twirl proudly in his custom Ankara rompers, quickly caught the attention of neighborhood mothers looking for affordable, stylish clothing for their children. She specialized in vibrant two-piece sets, Sunday church outfits, and school uniforms with unique detailing, ruffled hems, colorful stitching, and cartoon-inspired buttons. Word spread fast in the community, not just about her skill, but her patience, professionalism, and warmth. Raising Joseph alone came with its sacrifices. At just 3 years old, he was playful, energetic, and observant. He asked questions about everything, from why she didn't sleep much to why other kids had 2 parents at PTA meetings. Annabelle answered carefully, never bitter, always honest in a way a child could grasp. "It's just us for now," she would say with a smile, "but we're strong, and we're enough." Every naira she made went into Joseph's upkeep and the slow growth of her brand. She reused fabric scraps to make matching hats and bags. She offered promotional buy 2, get 1 deals and took night orders from teachers and nurses who only had time after work. The local church hosted a mini bazaar, and Annabelle booked a stall with her savings, showcasing her little mannequins in baby igbadas and peplum dresses. The applause from that day still echoed in her dreams. Despite the financial strain, Annabelle refused to compromise quality. She stayed up late sketching designs, often sewing with Joseph curled up beside her, snoring softly under a wrapper. Social media became her silent partner. She opened a business account, posted photos with bright captions, and used hashtags like hashtag ProudMamaTailor and hashtag RoyalStitchIbadan. Orders soon came in from neighboring towns, Osogbo, Ilorin, even a curious buyer from Lagos. Still, she never boasted. Instead, she whispered gratitude each time she sent out a finished product. She had no press features, no influencers, and no celebrity endorsements. Just grit, grace, and love for a little boy who giggled when he wore her clothes. Annabelle didn't need a spotlight. She was building a kingdom in silence, one button at a time. The lights inside Oasis Blue, one of Lagos's most exclusive rooftop restaurants in Victoria Island, glowed with theatrical brilliance. The air was filled with the scent of rose petals, imported Italian dishes, and soft classical music played by a live quartet in the corner. Camera crews were stationed discreetly around the restaurant, pretending to film a Valentine's Day special segment for the spotlight with James Patrick. Only a few in the room knew the real agenda. Dressed in a sleek burgundy tuxedo, James adjusted his cufflinks nervously, his heart thudding beneath his designer blazer. Lillian sat across from him in a custom emerald dress that shimmered under the chandelier, her expression composed but expectant. The evening had been filled with praises from fans, compliments from celebrities in attendance, and strategically planted moments for online buzz. Everything had been perfectly curated, just like she liked it. The waiter arrived with a covered silver tray, and the quartet shifted to a gentle rendition of Perfect by Ed Sheeran. As Lillian opened the tray to reveal a velvet box nestled among orchids, the LED screens behind them suddenly lit up with a looping montage of their photos, from industry galas to private yacht events. Gasps and applause echoed across the room. James rose from his seat and took a knee, the ring box now in his hand. "Lillian Vincent," he began, his voice slightly shaky yet confident under the glow of the cameras. "You've changed my life, elevated my vision, and taught me what power and partnership can look like. Will you marry me?" Lillian, ever poised, blinked once before breaking into a slow, confident smile. "Yes," she replied softly, placing her hand in his. The applause was thunderous. Champagne was poured. Hashtags exploded across social media, hashtag Power Couple of the Year, hashtag JPXLV, hashtag From Headline to Heart. Lillian kissed him lightly for the cameras, her fingers already sparkling with the large diamond solitaire that caught the light like a lens flare. James grinned, holding her hand aloft like a man who had won a trophy, not noticing the subtle glances exchanged among a few industry insiders who whispered about the speed of it all. None of them knew the full story. Not the silence left behind in Surrey. Not the single mother sewing school uniforms by lantern light. To the world watching on television, it was a fairy tale. But beyond the flashing lights, the shadows of forgotten promises still lingered, waiting for their moment to return. The announcement of James Patrick's engagement to Lillian Vincent dominated the headlines for weeks, painting a portrait of love, power, and prestige. Media houses dubbed it the Union of Influence, while lifestyle blogs created dedicated countdowns under flashy banners like hashtag Lillian and James 2025. From Belenija to Arise Lifestyle, the buzz was relentless. Every detail of the wedding preparations was broadcast with polished perfection. Lillian, with her PR expertise, orchestrated a wedding campaign rather than just a ceremony. She handpicked the vendors, top-tier designers, celebrity makeup artists, elite wedding planners, and event stylists flown in from Dubai. The venue? A private beach estate in Banana Island, reserved exclusively for dignitaries and billionaires. Security was contracted to a firm used by presidential families, and drones were assigned to record aerial footage for the exclusive wedding documentary to be sold to Netflix and Showmax. Magazines featured behind-the-scenes photos of Lillian trying on couture gowns flown in from Paris, while James posed for a cover shoot in an ivory agbada, rebranded as the groom who rewrote media. Their pre-wedding photos went viral, Lillian in a flowing orange gown on a sand dune, James in a tailored white kaftan beside a Rolls-Royce. In interviews, James spoke of finding peace with a woman who understood his journey, while Lillian described James as vision-driven, intentional, and deserving of royalty. Their names trended across social media. Invitations were sent out in gold-trimmed boxes with real crystals embedded inside. Influencers unboxed theirs live on Instagram. The guest list included politicians, movie stars, oil magnates, and international journalists. Even a famous Afrobeat artist was booked to perform live at the reception. As the days closed in, rehearsals were held in secret. Lillian moved temporarily into the bridal suite of a high-rise in Eco-Atlantic City to prepare mentally and spiritually. A private chef curated the wedding menu with a blend of continental and gourmet African cuisine, and the media was promised exclusive red carpet access. Every single moment was choreographed. What began as a union was now a spectacle, one that trended for the aesthetics but buried all traces of the past. No one asked about where James had come from. No one asked who had held his hands through obscurity. And he, drifting further into his new image, no longer spoke of it. The wedding was not just a celebration. It was a rebranding. And across town, far from the cameras and confetti, a young mother stitched another child's outfit in a dimly lit room, unaware that fate was already threading her name back into the story. The morning the email arrived, Annabelle Thompson was at her work table, pinning cuffs onto a batch of school uniforms when Joseph ran in holding her buzzing phone. "Mummy, message," he chirped, placing it carefully beside her. She wiped her hands and tapped the screen, expecting another order from her Instagram page. But this message was different. The sender was a luxury events agency based in Lagos, Golden Grace Events, with a formal request to design a one-of-a-kind, custom bridal robe for a high-profile wedding. The client's name was not disclosed, only the timeline, the desired aesthetic, and a note that her work had come highly recommended from a private client. Her heart beat faster as she read the commission details: flowing fabric, minimalist but regal, with hand-stitched beadwork and silk embroidery. A 50% deposit was already attached. For a moment, she sat still, the phone in her hand, her mind wrestling between curiosity and disbelief. Annabelle had never received such a prestigious offer before. Her business, Little Royals, focused primarily on children's clothing, but her Instagram page also featured custom work, bridal kimonos, maternity robes, and anniversary dresses, all done in her spare time. It was clear someone had seen those posts and passed her name forward. She didn't have the luxury of overthinking. She confirmed the order and began working immediately, pouring all her energy into the piece. She chose soft Duchess satin, imported through a vendor in Lagos Island, and spent nights sewing delicate lace into the sleeves. On the back, she embroidered the initials LV in rose gold thread, completely unaware of the name it represented. She didn't question the identity of the bride, she didn't care. This was business, an opportunity too big to let emotions interfere. As she worked, Joseph sat beside her drawing shapes in his coloring book, humming to himself. Annabelle would glance at him occasionally, each glance adding fuel to her focus. She layered the robe with elegance and restraint, making it soft yet commanding, exactly how she imagined a queen should feel. When she finished, she folded the robe carefully into a satin box, added a handwritten thank you card that read, "For the bride who knows her worth. May your day be filled with peace and purpose." She sealed it and sent it off through a delivery service with trembling hands. She never thought twice about who it was for, until 2 days later, when she opened Instagram and saw the robe she had made displayed in a series of pre-wedding photo shoots, wrapped around a woman she once knew only from whispers, now standing proudly beside James Patrick. The bride's name? Lillian Vincent. The exclusive venue on Lagos Island was cloaked in elegance and excess. Nestled along the edge of the Atlantic, the private beachfront estate had been transformed into a wedding haven that could rival royal affairs. White orchids lined the aisle, suspended chandeliers floated under transparent tents, and imported gold chairs shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Celebrity stylists, political figures, oil moguls, and influencers arrived in designer gowns and igbadas, stepping onto a mirrored walkway that stretched toward a giant floral archway overlooking the sea. Camera crews positioned themselves with practiced precision, capturing every designer's shoe that hit the carpet, every guest that struck a rehearsed pose. Security personnel, dressed in black tuxedos with earpieces, discreetly scanned invitations and faces. The air was thick with perfume, curiosity, and quiet envy. Lillian Vincent sat inside the bridal suite, surrounded by her glam team and event coordinators. She wore a silk dressing gown, its embroidery glinting softly under the vanity lights. A makeup artist touched up her cheekbones while a hairstylist adjusted her pearl-studded veil. Everyone called her Queen Lillian, and she soaked in the attention like sun through a stained-glass window. She had rehearsed this day for months, not just in fittings and floral selections, but in her mind, where she had imagined every gasp, every camera flash, and every awestruck whisper. Outside, guests murmured about her rise, how a PR strategist had landed one of Nigeria's most talked-about media men. She had not just secured James Patrick. She had redefined what winning looked like. Meanwhile, James stood near the altar, his igbada pressed to perfection, his face calm but unreadable. His groomsmen, mostly men from media circles, joked nervously, but James remained detached. He looked out toward the ocean, his thoughts far from the music and praise that echoed around him. His eyes scanned the crowd, politicians, CEOs, actresses he once only admired from a distance, now waving and nodding in recognition. Everything he had ever chased was here, present in flesh and influence. But his heart? It beat slower, almost too quiet. The applause felt distant. And still, he stood straight, hands clasped, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Unaware that a storm was heading his way, one not carried by the waves behind him, but walking toward the venue in heels, holding the hand of a small boy whose face mirrored his own. The soft hum of violins echoed across the ocean breeze as guests adjusted their seats, fanning themselves with personalized wedding programs bearing the golden crest JP and LV. Just as the MC began ushering the crowd to rise for the bride's grand entrance, a stir erupted near the back of the venue. Heads turned. The chatter faded into murmurs. And then silence. All eyes fell on a woman stepping slowly onto the mirrored walkway, not in a flashy gown, not escorted by cameras, but with the quiet poise of a storm about to break. Annabelle Thompson had arrived, dressed in a simple cream-colored wrapper and blouse set, her hair woven into neat cornrows. She looked elegant, untouched by the spectacle, and in her right hand was the tiny, curious hand of a child in a navy blue caftan with gold embroidery. He looked around with wide eyes and the faint smile of someone unaware of how much history he carried in his blood. Joseph. 5 years old. Bright, tall for his age, with the unmistakable face of James Patrick, same nose, same jawline, same slightly intense stare when curious. Gasps filled the air like sudden wind. Several guests squinted. A few whispered. Phones were discreetly raised. Annabelle didn't flinch. She walked with deliberate calm, her eyes locked not on Lillian, not on the decorations, but directly on James. And James froze. His fingers twitched at his side, his knees nearly gave. The color drained from his face. He stared at Joseph, and then at Annabelle, as if he were seeing ghosts clothed in truth. For a moment, it felt like the music stopped, though the violinist played on. James opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lillian, still behind the curtain with her bridal train, hadn't yet stepped out. The silence shattered when Joseph tugged at Annabelle's hand and whispered, "Mummy, is that him?" His voice, so soft yet piercing in the quiet, echoed across the venue like a verdict. Annabelle didn't answer. She simply placed her palm gently on her son's head and kept walking. Several guests recognized her now, those who had followed James back when he was still raw and real. Some had even met her briefly during his early rise. Now, the truth had arrived at his wedding in human form. Not scandal, not gossip. Flesh. Blood. Legacy. Guests stepped back as mother and son passed, the glamour around them shrinking like a collapsing tent. No tears. No drama. Just presence. A truth too solid to ignore, too loud to bury. And in that moment, James knew, no camera, no headline, no rebranding could silence what had just walked in. The entrance of Annabelle and Joseph was like a pin dropped in the middle of a polished glass palace, everything cracked. Lillian hadn't yet walked down the aisle when whispers reached her bridal suite. Her stylist rushed in pale-faced, whispering urgently into her ear. When Lillian pulled aside the sheer curtain and caught sight of Annabelle standing calmly at the edge of the aisle with Joseph, the gown nearly fell from her shoulders. Her perfectly sculpted jaw clenched. She recognized Annabelle immediately, from the Instagram photo, from the quiet rumors, and from the silk robe she herself had paraded in days before. But what jolted her most wasn't the woman, it was the boy. The boy with James's exact face. Her breath hitched. The photographers, sensing drama, instinctively shifted their lenses toward the suite doors as Lillian stormed out, her veil flying behind her like a broken promise. She marched past the floral archway in her gown, halting in front of James who still hadn't moved. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous, but very much audible to the 100 watching eyes. James stuttered. "Lillian, I didn't know. She never told me." But the words were weak, limp, shameful. His eyes shifted from Lillian to Annabelle to the boy now gripping his mother's wrapper with confusion. Lillian let out a sharp, bitter laugh, snatched the engagement ring off her finger, and threw it at James's chest. "You had a child? A whole son? And you didn't know? You didn't ask?" Her voice rose, trembled, cracked. "You're a fraud. You built an empire on lies, even to yourself." And with that, she turned, kicked off her heels in fury, and disappeared through the crowd, her bridal train scurrying after her. Guests parted for her like waves. Socialites began whispering, influencers live streaming. It was no longer a wedding. It was a reckoning. James turned to Annabelle, desperation written across his face. "Annabelle. Please. I didn't know. I swear to you, if I had any idea, if you had just told me," but Annabelle raised one hand. Her expression wasn't angry, it was resolute. "You weren't looking, James," she said softly. "Even when I was right beside you, you weren't looking. Why would I give you a son to ignore, too?" Joseph clung to her side, wide-eyed, watching the man who looked like him. James took one step forward, eyes damp, but Annabelle shook her head. "He's loved. He's safe. And we're not your secret anymore." Then, without drama or pause, she turned and walked away, her son's hand in hers, their silhouettes moving gracefully past the broken altar and shattered spotlight. Behind her, James stood motionless. Alone. The applause, the cameras, the curated image, all gone. All that remained was silence. And the son he never knew he had until it was too late. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.